closest to the consensus.
Yeah, wherever you're done with it.
I don't think this one's hooked up. So they're somewhere on the bleachers. I think it'd be picked up steps.
So it came out on
I mean, I don't know if that's capability. I'd just be done with it.
Didn't hear. I didn't hear.
I had a little fight. If you can do that, that'd be great.
Well, I'll tell them.
My main sewer goes like this. Make sure you're
I didn't-
stressed. Your main
This one in it.
ties in with the mark.
For them?
Yeah, cities.
Nothing yet?
That's
Not yet.
anything. Dust will scratch it. Track winner. Scratch it.
It's already downloaded on there, so we're good there.
That is more important.
That's crazy.
Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order, please. Administration Operations Committee meeting Monday, August 27th, 2018, 7 p.m. Heidrich.
Here.
Holtzmeyer.
Aye.
Moheski.
Aye.
Patke.
Here.
Pettit. Scornia. Sullentrup.
Here.
Waterman. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will all the committee members answer if they have or have not read the minutes of the meeting dated July 23rd, 2018? Heidrich.
Aye.
Holtzmeyer.
Aye.
Moheski. Patke.
Yes.
Pettit.
Yes.
Sullentrup.
Yes.
Having read the minutes, are there any comments or questions?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Moheski, seconded by Heidrich, to approve the minutes from our last meeting dated July 23rd, 2018. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? By your vote, you approve the minutes. Thank you. Presentations, Fire Service Performance Review, and Station Study.
Over here.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members, good evening. My name is Stuart McCutcheon with ESCI Emergency Services Consulting International, and I'm here tonight to give a presentation on your station location study and your ISO benchmarking study.
You want to move the microphone closer to you there? So,
Sure.
there you go. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, I've been asked to keep it 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through this presentation. However, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. As well, we're overcoming some technical issues, so I may have to move over to the other microphone so we can move through the presentation. But this will be a culmination of both reports, more or less moves in the same order the report is presented. And so this will be about a 35,000-foot overview of the main points of the report. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. All right, microphone working okay? Mm-hmm. So like I said, this is the ISO station location and benchmarking study. About us, in business 40 years, consulting arm of the International Fire Chiefs Association. Purpose of the station location is to examine your proposed locations and additional locations and see whether or not it's needed at this time. The understanding on the ISO benchmarking study, we went in, compared you against 25 comparables using ISO proprietary data to develop a list of recommendations for the community to really get the most bang for its buck on ISO ratings. So the way this presentation is organized, we'll have the station location study, then a quick overview of the ISO benchmarking study, and then finally a summary of the combined findings. So really what we want to understand is where are we now, where should we be, and how do we get there? And this is really, I think, one of the overarching themes of tonight. We have all this information now, what do we do with it? I think one of the major things we really want to do is for the community to establish what are our performance thresholds, what do we expect from our fire department. We know that it can be measured, we're collecting the data to measure it. When we get to a point where we can no longer hit those thresholds, it may be time to make some type of intervention, whether that be additional equipment, stations, what have you, but use a data-driven approach to make decisions. So with that, here's the station location study. Area overview, 3 stations in the city of Washington, right outside the city of St. Louis, population of 14,000, about 10 square miles. Some risk figures here, and again, I'm moving fairly quickly so we can get through this. Some demographic information, department information formed in 1852. Here are the 4 facilities. Here are all their capital assets apparatus-wise. Staffing-wise, one of the major things we saw is in fire prevention. They need some additional support in fire prevention. Fire prevention is an entire division, just like operations is an entire division within a fire department, and there are some elements within prevention that they're going to need some assistance with. Here's service delivery and performance. We compared the Washington Volunteer Fire Department covering the city and the districts as a whole versus the city alone to draw a comparison of the two, so you can see those figures there for call volume, call frequency, a lot of fire alarms happening, and that's fairly common in areas with where prevention needs some support. Here are some different variations on month of year, time of day, things of that nature. Here's a graphic showing two things. So one is a hotspot analysis. So you ever hear a police department talking about hotspots? We have a break-in at 123, 125, 127 Main Street. It's going to make a hotspot because they're close to each other. So that's what this bullseye ring is coming in the center of the city. The second is that where your incidents are located. Now, if we put a dot for every incident, they'd all be weighted equally. We might go to one place 100 times a year and another place once, and we've never been back. So the larger the dot, the more frequently we go there. And so this is giving you a couple of pieces of information all in one graphic.
What's the time span on that data that's on that graph?
This is 2015 through 17.
Okay, 2
And
years.
so for this type of data, you know, we want to try to grab, we need enough data for it to be relevant. But we also don't want to go too far back because what happened 5-10 years ago is probably not so relevant for us today. And so we want to try to find that sweet spot in there where we have enough data to make the analysis valid, but also not too far back where we're getting other information that's not helpful.
Stuart, one, Mayor Saluski, it's 3 years study. All 15, all 16, all stuff.
Okay,
Yes, 2015 through 2017.
I guess I remember that now.
Here's population densities. So you see as we're towards the center of the city, we're more dense. As we spread outwards, we become less dense. That tends to follow suit with where we saw our bullseye happening. Calls are going to happen where people are located. Here is our ISO performance, 1.5 mile radius. We have some blank areas to the southeast. We have a little bit of blank areas out to the west, northwest. Not a lot going out one so much other than your industrial versus your southeast where you're getting some growth and some population in there. And so we'll touch base on that later. This is your ladder coverage. And so what ISO is and we'll go in a little more depth later, they're an insurance organization. They go through and rank your fire department alone. They're not concerned about EMS rescue, only structure fires, how well your fire department, water department, and communication centers perform, and then assign a rating for insurance purposes. So this is the effect your truck company has on your city and the coverage area. Here's your 5 mile radius. So for the city of Washington, everyone is within that 5 miles, so they'd be eligible for an ISO rating. There's some portions of the district, however, they're outside that 5 mile, and Chief and Deputy Chief and I have discussed some of the options available for how to get those areas covered as well. Here's your hydrant coverage. In addition to your 5 mile, you need to have a water supply, otherwise we can't put the fire out. City of Washington's pretty well covered up with hydrant supplies. Here's another criteria. So as opposed to ISO, we have NFPA 1720. This is the criteria for volunteer fire departments. It's based on your population density. In town, Washington has an urban density more than 1,000 people per square mile. Outside, it's more rural or possibly remote. And so in addition to setting up performance standards of what do we expect of our fire department, I think we expect more of our fire department in downtown Washington than we do in an extreme edge where there is fairly rural. So we need to set up these different standards or benchmarks for performance so we know when we're doing a good job and we're meeting our benchmarks. Here is a travel time map, and so everything in the light blue is 4 minutes, beyond that's 8 minutes, so pretty much inside the city of Washington, when those firefighters hit the rig, you can expect them to be almost everywhere in the city within 4 minutes, and then extending outwards the times increase. Here's a smaller scale map of the same image, so we can see the performance out in the district. Call concurrency, how often are multiple calls occurring? For the most part, 9 out of 10 times, there's only one call going on. There are times when more of that occurs. However, because of your strong volunteer base, for the most part, Washington has a very low mutual aid response request. meaning your volunteers are turning out, and that's very admirable. Anywhere in the country, they'd love to see numbers like this. So these firefighters are really doing a good job for the community. Unit hour utilization, this is how often they're being utilized. These numbers are 10% is usually where you start seeing some type of performance effect for career staff. This is a volunteer department, and there's several units spread across the city and personnel, so our utilization rates are fairly low. Number of units per incident, so about half of our calls we can get it done with one unit, 75% take two, and then so on and so forth. Here's how we're laying in. We start doing multi-unit responses. This is what we can anticipate at the 90th percentile for multiple units coming in, working structure fire being an example. Here's a performance summary information, and this is important because this is going to tie into ISO. We have our alarm handling time. That's the amount of time from when you dial 911 until the operator dispatches. So that's our call processing, alarm handling. Turnout time, the time the call is dispatched, the time those firefighters are in a rig, en route to the call. Travel, when they go en route till they arrive on scene. Response time is from when they're dispatched till they arrive on scene, and then total response time. And you know, for me, this is the bread and butter. When I pick up the phone and dial 911, when can I expect these firefighters to be there? That's going to be our total response time. So here is a performance summary of all those figures. Call processing time is pretty good across the board. Turnout time, the high twos, low threes, is phenomenal for a volunteer department. Travel times, you're in the high fives into the sixes. And in the report, it goes into a little more depth for that because our predicted travel times show that you should be able to get farther than that. And so when we start seeing differences or variations between where you should be able to get to where versus how you're actually performing, now we're getting into the idea of why we need a performance benchmark to figure out what's happening, what's driving this. Is it because of traffic patterns? Is it because of roadways not being wide enough? Is it because we need a fire station somewhere else? Those are all pieces of information that's used together to make a policy decision on how the city should proceed. Here is district-wide performance. The prior was city. This is district-wide. Growth demand projections. So for our growth, we're pretty solid. We used a couple of different statistics to do our historic and then make estimations. Probably the answer is going to lie somewhere in the middle. Same with service demand. The service demand is running about triple the rate of what your growth is. But as we even look out to 2050, we're talking about 1,500 calls a year. So even at that rate, we're within an acceptable bound. This is a simplified zoning and map. We can see where our residential is in yellow, our commercial corridor running through, our industrial is out at the edge. And so then again of importance, we have some coverage issues out to the west where we have industrial. There are people working there, but it's not a highly dense area versus our southeast. We saw those previous slides. Calls are going to the curb where the people are at. If the people are in an area and we can't provide coverage, that could be what's driving up our actual travel performance versus some of our predicted. And again, I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on any one piece of information, but take it in the holistic view to make a decision about it. Here's some risk demand information. So this is your expectation for flooding, frequent flooding, occasional and rare flooding. Tornado tracks, some of our historic tornado tracks. I think I went back to early 90s, mid 90s for this. So there is some tornadic activity. Let's see, our schools. The schools, we have a lot of people that are probably within a higher risk category, all culminated together in one location. So we need to know where those are located and whether or not we can get to them. Here are our nursing homes, same idea, population that's at risk, a lot of them in one location. Here are some of our mines. So like there's a lead mine pretty close to downtown at one time, so that was news for a lot of people. But should someone get trapped in that area, that's something the responders need to know about. So then the meat and potatoes of this, the fire station location analysis. We have some higher service demand in the east side of the city that's outside of our 1.5 for ISO. It's also outside of our 4-minute our performance is greater, our actual is greater than our predicted performance. And so a station out there could improve performance. We don't have one there now, so there's nothing historical we can use to estimate that. We have a prediction model we can use. However, like I said, I would take these pieces of information holistically to make a decision on when the time is right to move. With the idea that, as well, that even if we made a decision tonight, we're looking at 2.5 years before a station's there and functional and operational. So we don't want to wait until the problem is at a head before we make a decision. We probably want to decide, what is our threshold before we start taking action. Here's how we determined. We took your current fire department locations, plotted all of your historic call data, 2015, 2017, plotted some more locations there based on where it looked like some potential holes in coverage, and said if we can only pick one more location, which location will give us the greatest coverage area and be able to answer the greatest number of calls in a 4-minute travel, and that was your location there. And again, I'm trying to move pretty quickly so we can get through this, so I apologize for the brevity. So response times and targets, I've touched base on that. So we have some recommendations. One recommendation is always maintain status quo. Keep doing what we've always done. Option 2, we could maintain status quo in the interim, but add that inspector position. I've not gone into great detail with it tonight, but any type of development, planning, fire safety inspections, all these things that the public expects of us. Right now that's going on the shoulders of firefighters who have full-time jobs and are trying to do this on the side. Well, if I work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, what are the odds of me getting into a business that's open 8 to 5 Monday through Friday? And so that's probably one of the glaring or shining examples of why that position may need some attention. Another option is we could add a station at Phoenix Center Drive and Vernacey Drive, correct? Vernacey Drive, and that's that location that was selected. Or 4, we could attempt to do both in the short term. These are all policy decisions. Just showing you the data, giving you the different information, and giving you some ideas of how to proceed. How you all choose to proceed is completely up to you. Impact to ISO, if we add that additional station, our coverage rate goes up to about just shy of 90 road miles that we can cover with inside the city. Now our 4-minute travel time pretty well covers up all that area of the city of Washington. So that's 35,000 foot view of the fire station study. The ISO benchmarking study, it's an exclusive partnership between ESCI and ISO. Here's a quick breakdown. Number 1's the best. Number 10's no fire protection at all. It goes in 10-point increments. Communication center's 10 points, fire department's 50 points. Your water department's 40 points. Community risk reduction is an additional 5.5 points. And then there's a thing called divergence. You have to have a balance between your fire and water departments. If I have a great fire department with no water, I can't put the fire out. The same is true if we inverse it. And so whatever that difference is, you get a subtraction called divergence. Here's just a quick shot of executive summary. For the most part, we're doing well. The average is a couple areas we need some attention in. Mostly, and if we look at those, the training, staffing, deployments, even water supply, a lot of that comes down to documentation. Everything's data-driven today. They need to have the data to support the information we're giving them. Without the data, it doesn't exist. Whether it's happening or not, the data's got to be present. That's another reason to consider some of these administrative type functions within the fire department. You're going to, for these, especially ISO, and if you ever sought accreditation, you're going to live and die off your ability to provide data. And that's it's tough for career departments to do. And so just bear that in mind.
So that's something that we could just in-house, add a position, get the data entered, and it would help out.
Yeah, so so for example,
And that's what I read.
how many firefighters do we have? We have a structure fire. We had 10 structure fires last year. How many firefighters showed up? Well, we look at our logs and it shows we had 10. Well, what if we really had 20? That's double the score of your ISO credit. But who's going back and double checking that? There needs to be some kind of a QA process, quality assurance process, that happens quickly enough that we can remember. We could have that fire last month and now we're all sitting in the room. And so now was Joe there? I don't remember. Or how are we keeping track of our logbooks? Well, they're supposed to sign up at the station. But what if they drove halfway to the station and then we had it under control and they went back home? That's still a response. How are we capturing that? So those mechanisms of how we do those things are going to affect how the world views us. The same with the ISO, we got dinged on the water because there's other water providers who refused to provide, or I guess couldn't provide the information, one of the two. You got dinged for that as well. The data wasn't there, so you got a 0 for that scoring. But the ability to capture those metrics and someone to stay on top of it, and that way we can make good informed decisions. If we have the data and we have all the things holistically, we can make a good decision based on the data and have a good prediction of what's going to occur. Without it, it's going to be difficult. Let's see, so here is your emergency communications, almost 10 out of 10. There were just a couple of little items in there, mostly documentation. Fire department, 30 out of 50. A lot of that had to do with documentation. Water department, 30 out of 40. Almost all of that had to do with documentation. Community risk reduction did very well, 4.5 out of 5.5, and these are additional points. So if you were an ISO, say 3 at 76 points, and you got the 5.5 risk reduction, you're ISO 2 now. So, and that's your fire prevention, fire inspector, community safety, all these other elements that are really the other half of the fire department that go on behind the scenes that people don't typically consider. But that's how we got smoke detectors in the buildings. That's why we don't run 3 structure fires a day. We have prevention that keeps fires from happening to begin with. It's great someone comes and saves my family when my house burns down. It's even better when somebody can help me prevent that from happening in the first place. And that's what prevention's all about. Here's what our divergence score looks like. So we lost 3 points. So if you figure we picked up 4.5 in community risk, we lost just over 3 in divergence. And that's the difference between our water and fire. Documentation will probably clean a lot of that up. And then here's just an overall. So the maximum point is 105.5. Washington's at 71.73. It's a solid ISO 3. Did better than your peer groups, Midwest and national averages. So overall, you're doing a good job.
Where's ISO 2 at?
ISO 2 is going to be an 80 to an 89.
80, okay.
So really, documentation is the biggest thing on here. Training, we need to do pre-fire planning. We need to do fire safety inspections. Those are happening, but the documentation, again, is lacking. Personnel, probably documentation is the biggest issue we have on that. Water supply, documentation. Deployment, this is where it would pick up if we have a process where we can start checking these answers and making sure they're accurate, and probably having some support to get these things accomplished. That will really help out, and those support elements could come through in community risk reduction function, and so we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because again, we want to get the most bang for our buck on any position we recommend. So here's a summary of the combined findings. Fire station, it may well be warranted. We have a gap there. We can't get there by ISO. We can't get there by our travel time. Our travel times for actual times are higher than our predicted values. It's either personnel or it's the location of the station. But we need to make sure we have good data to proceed forward with that decision. Also, does it need to happen today or does it need to happen in the future? That's a policy decision that you all need to make. Fire inspector, the workload is pretty well all being put on one person to do part-time in their spare time outside of working a full-time job right now. Most prevention divisions in a town this size are going to probably have a fire marshal and a full-time fire inspector just as a point of comparison. You get a lot of benefits from having that position as well as having someone there that understands fire departments could help you out with documentation. ISO has changed their schedule. That's reflected in your new study. So you're an ISO 3, that's your official rating. The scoring is all data-driven, and accurate record keeping is a key component of this. Some of the things for your fire department access, we just need to be cognizant of our current and future development. Historic districts, historic buildings can be especially troublesome because they didn't meet these codes and standards here today, and so we just need to take those into account as we're doing some of these things with where utilities are located, narrow roads, things of that nature. And then if we can establish what our performance benchmarks are, we can start as we hit these or exceed them, use them as part of our data-driven process to make decisions about when the time to act has reached us. Let's see, so the recommendation is a part-time safety inspector this time. The reason it's part-time is we've given you a lot of recommendations. Let's stick our toes in the water. If we have a part-time position, let's see if it works. We find out this is doing a lot of these things we thought they would do, but we're still in need. We could go to full-time. But it gives you an opportunity to test some of these recommendations. Develop response objectives for the city. It's pretty important. Monitor levels of volunteerism. It's suffering nationwide. Washington's amazing at their ability to keep their volunteers up. Let's see, documentation, the annual report giving these performance outcomes. Consider adding a fire station if that's the policy decision the city reaches. Thresholds, I touched on that. We got a lot of false alarms. Inspectors can help out with that. Work with your communication center and your police department to help the comm center employees be the best that they can be. It's a team effort. Fire department work with your planning and zoning to make sure everyone's needs are met and no one's getting too far out onto a limb. Look at some of your interconnected roadways, and we're at questions. So
Take a breath.
that was a mouthful, but there was 140 pages of report there. But does anyone have any questions?
Well, when do you anticipate the need for the new station?
I think the need is really going to come. We need to. I think we have to establish performance guidelines first, and probably what would make sense if inside the city of Washington has a performance standard, and then your district has a performance standard because they're different entities. The population's density is different, coverage is all alike. So, if we set a performance standard and we say it's going to be X at 80% of the time or 90% of the time, if we can't meet that in a certain area, and we have to be collecting the data to know this, then we say, okay, we're not meeting it. What are the possible answers? Well, if we can't get there because it's too far away, because of traffic or what have you, it has to be a stationed issue. If it's because no one's there to respond as a personnel, we have the responders, so it must be a distance issue. With that being said, though, what are the priorities? I think today, for me, a priority would be having some of that internal assistance in the department so we can get this data captured. So when we make these decisions and tell the public we're making this based on data, we can actually go to the data and feel good about what it says and the decisions we're making. It's going to take, even when we made a decision tonight, it'd take a couple years on a station, so I think there's time. There's other mitigating factors. When is the rightness to act on that station? That's something you all would, as a policy decision, make the decision for the community. But, if we have those performance standards in place, then we can say with certainty, based on our data, we're unable to get here in this time. It doesn't meet our standards, so we're going to initiate this process. And then you all dictate the timeline at that point for how quickly it's accomplished.
Would a new firehouse or a fire inspector, fire marshal, et cetera, get us from an ISO 3 to an ISO 2, and then what would the advantages be there? I guess in my previous conversations, it's always been, we need this. Obviously, the fire station, we've all kind of on the forefront looked at that, but is that going to get us to a 2, or is that going to keep us at a 3 for another umpteen years? Any idea on that?
So back to where I just answered the other question, we have someone there internal with a focus on we've got to get our data. We need to be in these buildings. We need to have the information. We need the quality check the data we're collecting. We need to make sure it's accurate. That'll get you pretty close to an ISO 2. That extra station would probably push you over the hump. But we've got to get our data correctly. All this stuff today is data driven. And that's what I told Chief when that ISO accreditation board from CPSC, whomever, fire department related, they come and they say, I need to see your summary sheets. What are your findings? If you have no findings, then you're not going to make it. So you need to have that information. Moving forward, that inspector right now probably give you the opportunity to test water, see how that goes, and probably collect the data a little bit longer. Whether you want to set up a 6-month period or 1-year period, if we're recognizing the need today and we're beginning to look at this process and collecting data specifically to make that determination, I think we're doing our due diligence. We see a potential problem, we're investigating it, and at the end of that period, if it's determined, yes, we need to proceed, I think you'd have all the backing you would need at that point to make that informed decision. Today, there's still a little bit of inconsistencies in the data, and so there'd have to really be something out there driving it, I think, to push me over the edge to, to commit to doing something right this moment.
Just to clarify, do we have the data and it's not usable, like it's paper and pencil, or are we not collecting the data currently?
We have the data there. What's hurting as much as anything is how many people are showing up on these calls. Because we're a volunteer, in a career system, if I know I've got 3 firefighters here and I got 4 firefighters there, when the tone goes off, I know who's coming. In a volunteer system, we just don't know, so we need the accurate record keeping. And that's whether, on our ISO or even on some of our, within the station location report, it can change. Are we going to get response A at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning like we did at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night? Probably not, but it's the system that we have. And so being able to go in and document those things and record them. The other real issue that we have is there's not a lot of fire safety inspections going on in buildings. When we go into these public places, our rear exits blocked or shelving blocking exits, or there are things hanging from the ceilings. If we haven't been in there in 5 or 10 years, the answer is probably yes. Not that those business owners are doing anything wrong or that they're doing anything that they, they're not doing it intentionally. They've not had that contact. And it may be unrealistic. And, as you start to approach populations of 15, 20,000 in the future, that someone who works full-time during the week can capture all those locations. And so, not at all suggesting your volunteer department's not doing a good job. They're doing a great job. But there's other elements within a fire department we need to pay some attention to.
Does our chiefs and lieutenants know all about the data collection problem?
They do. And as part of this process, and later in the week, we're looking at some other alternatives of how to make this more streamlined and more effective. Because really, you don't want to spend all your time doing paperwork. You'll never get the main job done. So trying to find that balance is the key. Any other questions?
Anything else?
Thank you. All right, Madam Mayor, council members, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you, and thank you for allowing ESCI to do this report for you.
Okay, very
Thank you so
good.
much.
Thank you.
Budget workshop.
Mary, do you want to start or do you want me to start? That's right. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. Okay. Did yours take a long time? Kind of figured you didn't hear it.
I didn't. But you can start if you want, and
well-
then I'll go over the highlights or
Yeah, I
whatever
was
you
just
want to
gonna
do,
go ahead.
so.
Thank you, gentlemen. See ya.
Good reader. Wait,
You want me to start, or?
Go ahead. I'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
There's that in a minute.
Okay, so included in your packet tonight, you have,
Can you enter that report into the minutes?
Doesn't say.
Accept? No?
maybe they're not done.
Sorry.
Mary, do we need to accept that item into the minutes?
Okay, thanks.
No. It was just a presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, included in your packet, you have the 2019 budget. And just some highlights on the personnel side, we have 6% estimated health insurance increase effective for February. And also included is an wage increase for employees consisting of 2.1% cost of living allowance and a 0.9% merit that employees are eligible for based on performance evaluations. Some new positions that are included are the new part-time commercial building inspector position, which was added to the fire department, which is an estimated increase of approximately $22,000. We added a new resource officer position for the police department with an estimated increase of $50,000. And then deleted positions are the IT director position, since we're outsourcing IT, and also one maintenance worker position in parks was not budgeted in 2019, resulting in a decrease in wages and benefits of approximately $118,000 between those two positions. On the revenue side, we have an increase of 2% sales tax revenue over where we think we'll end this past fiscal year.
Jeff, did you have a question about
I
something?
did. The Parks Department maintenance worker, was that from the Parks Department? Or was that
Yes.
we need less?
It was a maintenance worker one position that we asked them to go ahead and not fill at this time for this budget year.
that we always have an issue with, we don't have enough help in the Parks Department.
We're looking at what we're gonna do for contracting out for grass cutting, because that's primarily what the job was, according to Darren when I talked to him. There is some added responsibilities that they have over the winter.
Okay.
You know, when they're not, but we feel that we can go ahead and compensate for that.
Is this the time and place to ask these questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. I felt
No,
like I was.
you're right on.
And we did increase the contract for grass cutting by, I want to say 25,000?
Yes, but that wasn't parks grass cutting, that was public works grass cutting.
So we did increase other contracted services.
One other thing that I've talked with Darren and both John about, one of the things that we're gonna look at over this winter is to see what all are we cutting? And what all do we need to go ahead and cut? And what are some areas that we can go ahead and do some alternatives, like put in native grasses, et cetera, and some other things that do not require the level of maintenance that we've had. I mean, I've gone personally through some of the park system and just asked, why are we cutting that? You know, I mean, I understand there's some parts of it that you want to have done, but I think we're gonna take a little bit of an inventory this winter and kind of take a look at what can we do to go ahead and keep that down and that maintenance down so that we can go ahead. It's not just, hey, you don't get this worker, sorry, deal with it.
Right.
We're gonna take a look at what can we do.
But on the surface, we don't have enough help in the Parks Department to get everything done, and then we take a worker away at a budget. Hence my questions, that's all. We'll discuss more. Thank you.
Included also is our capital expenditures of $9.3 million, which also includes the 8-year plan for the new capital improvement sales tax renewal. We had 3 deferred park projects from fiscal year 2018. If you recall that we deferred those because we weren't sure on where sales tax was going to fall and where our revenues were going to fall last year. The 3 items, the Riverfront Pavilion roof replacement, we actually completed that in 2018. And the resurfacing, decking, main park playgrounds, and tennis court painting were both budgeted in 2019. So we were able to come up with funds for those projects. Also included is a website upgrade of $24,000. And that's about all I have for this year's budget, or for the 19 budget, unless
And the
Darren wants to
website, I
add.
guess I want to elaborate a little bit. That was just something that we wanted, as you all know, we rolled out a new logo this last year. We wanted to go ahead and update our city's website. We want to go ahead and make it much more interactive for the general public so that they can go ahead and reserve facilities such as in our Parks Department, or do building permits so they don't have to go ahead and show up, et cetera. Trying to be much more customer service oriented, and we feel that we had to go ahead and do that with our website to start. So it's important. We felt it was needed to go ahead. We've actually even put out, I think, the RFQ for just to see what's out there, to see so that we're ready to go hopefully at the beginning of the new budget year. Did you go into the stormwater?
No, not yet. I just was covering case. Okay. One suggestion that Darren and I looked at and kind of came up with was currently in the stormwater fund, we have an ordinance that allows us to transfer 33% of the revenue, local option use tax that we take in over to the general fund and for general fund purposes. And the stormwater fund at the end of this year is going to have approximately like 3.5 or 4 million. So it's pretty much funded. And one of the suggestions that we had was in the past couple of years, we've been buying new equipment that's been needed to be replaced. But in the process, when we do that, our vehicle equipment replacement fund has been lowered. So we would possibly recommend that we change that from 33% up to 50%, and that would give us an increase of approximately like 85,000. And if we did that, we would take that money and start putting that into the vehicle equipment replacement fund to help build that back up. So that was just a suggestion that we had for future.
Didn't we just change that a few years ago?
Yeah,
it seems like we did.
Maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I can't remember exactly.
Do you remember what it was originally?
It was a dollar amount.
Okay,
but
that's
what
right.
happened
Okay.
is that was back when the city
You're right.
the city had city stickers, and it was like 50-something thousand and change. And then the city did away with the stickers, so then that amount is what we transferred every year.
Okay.
And at the time, that amount was approximately a third of the revenues being brought in.
Okay.
So that's where we came up with the third amount. And then that has grown, of course, because sales tax has grown over the last 20 years. I want to say the local option use tax was maybe 1994, but I don't quote me on that.
Okay, thanks.
In the stormwater fund, it says 3.1 million, but, I mean, we always have that in reserve for major projects, but we don't have anything, we think everything we do will be covered under that.
Yeah,
Take
one of
away.
the things we're going to start to utilize, and I think John has talked to you and brought it to your attention, was the MS4, that regulations that we're going to have to. And we put, how much do we put in there annually now? I think we set aside, but a lot of this is outreach, public outreach, because that's one of the first steps that we have to take. John, you want to elaborate?
Go ahead.
Just looking here, it's approximately $50,000 is what we initially, to get this MS4 program more up and running. And Darren hit right on it. It's a lot of public outreach. That's education is really what we're really trying to hit with that $50,000. Another kind of item that I've kind of been putting in out of the stormwater fund specifically is the lining of storm sewer pipes. Historically, we've not done that. Just very similar to sanitary sewer. You know how we do our pipe lining or cast in place slip lining. Yeah, there you go. That's the word we use. Slip lining. We do that for our sanitary pipes, but I've increased that or requested to increase that for our storm sewer as well. The first one I recall doing was last year. It was a $35,000 project on Washington Heights Drive by Ponderosa. There's a 36-inch metal pipe underneath there that was completely rotted away at the bottom. We would have to open dig that, shut the road down, and then place a pipe in. But we were able to slip line that as part of that project last year. So I've actually increased that to $100,000 to try to hit some of these downtown ones that are, I mean, in dire need of some maintenance rather than open cut the streets. So that's just an ongoing stormwater fund item that we've been looking at. Maybe a little bit of a different viewpoint than holding on to it for a large project, trying to start using it for some maintenance style projects. So
I do want to elaborate a little bit on the wages. What we, as Mary said, we're looking at, we wanted to go ahead and have a total of 3%. The cost of living this year in Missouri was 2.1% increase. We also wanted to put something in there for the merit. And as we said, it's close to 1%, but it's most employees will not get the full 3%. I mean, it just depends upon what their performance evaluation by their supervisors will go ahead and have for them. So it's not just a blanket. In the past, I think that's how the city has kind of approached it, but we're going to have, we're going to have a little bit less. We felt it was important to go ahead. I felt it was important to go ahead and include that within the budget, and that was one of our challenges with cutting the budget back to go ahead and accommodate that. Was due to the fact that we had the compensation study plan that was done. Last year, if you'll remember, we really didn't do it based on merit. It was like, what is the rate that those positions should be paid? And so we raised all of them up as much as we could at the start of the budget year. We took another look at it throughout the budget year and made some adjustments. But this is the first true time that we're able to go ahead and kind of implement that performance evaluation plan, and we want to go ahead and do that. So we wanted to have a decent number that we could go ahead and work with, and that's the reason why we shot for 3%. So I just wanted to give that little bit more input into that for you.
Any other questions or comments? Doesn't look like it.
Do you have anything else?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you. Oh, well, I guess I can give you a time frame.
Yes.
There isn't enough time between now and September 4th's council meeting because I have to advertise this in the paper. So it will be, the public hearing will be September 20th, that Thursday.
That Thursday evening
meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
But if you do have any changes, I mean, you
Yes.
can feel
If you
free
have
to
any
contact
comments
us
or
if something
questions.
comes
If we
up,
have,
but
yeah, if we have questions, just
I know
reach
it's a lot
out
to
to
digest.
Right.
or
That's the
Darren.
reason why we have
Right.
a workshop now so that you can go ahead and digest it. If you have any other
To give some
questions,
time.
let us know.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Darren.
Department head discussion, Tyler Technologies, licensing, regulatory, permitting.
Okay, good evening. Real quick, this is a Tyler module that we currently have budgeted for this year. It will actually extend into next year. Currently, the building department, and this is a specific building department item that marries very well with the finance department. Currently, we work off it's a version 10. It is a version behind the finance department, every other department, as far as how we get building permits kicked out. It's a very cumbersome program, doesn't do a very good job of documentation, which I know the fire department study kind of hit on that a little bit, and we're trying hard to get that documentation kind of up to snuff in all departments. But in doing so, there's a cover letter there of what this costs. It's a $37,750 investment with a $16,804 maintenance fee. It would basically bring the software component that the building department utilizes to track permits, communicate with finance, business licensing. I know Mary may have some other items to add to it. But another portion is it does utilize our GIS system a little more, so we're able to click on parcels and have that information right in front of us. So it's just an effort to make the building department much more efficient in getting permits out the door and to track those permits so we can kind of ensure compliance. I know there's been some questions as far as permit compliance that maybe we've been trying to address over the past couple of months. So we're requesting to move forward with this. If you so choose to do so, we would have an ordinance in front of you at the next council meeting. And it's a approximately 3-4 month process to get it kind of up and running. I do feel it is a pretty good time with our new building official to start fresh and move forward.
This is a replacement software. It's not an upgrade to software package you currently have.
Well, sort of both, I guess. It replaces the Tyler 9 software, but it is an upgrade. So it physically, I believe, removes that and then puts in a whole new interface. Think of it as going from I don't know if anybody remembers, like a DOS computer system to a Windows computer system. It's bringing us actually into the 21st century.
Is it cloud-based or will it reside on your
It
server?
is. There you go. It is cloud-based. And like I said, from what Mary's kind of telling me is, it communicates much better with our finance department. Business licensing is a big thing. We don't really have a good enforcement mechanism on business licensing and things like that. So we feel like this just makes it much more efficient. And quite honestly, it could, in the future, as we get more efficient with our software and our equipment and just kind of goes across the whole board, we can limit some of these personnel things. We're taking advantage of the technology that's available to us. So that's the goal.
It's much more customer service.
Correct.
We can go ahead and start
There you go.
utilizing credit cards, et cetera, for payments. That's just something that in the building department that can be a little bit cumbersome right now. If you have to physically come to.
Yeah, we could, at some point, we could take in applications online would be a huge goal for us, whether you have to physically come in. I know people have to physically come in, hand that application, go upstairs, hand in a check, things like that. We would look into, I think it has the capability to take credit card payment online and then schedule online. So it really, really streamlines our operation. And I know it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress, but we can't do anything if we don't have the tools to do it.
So we have this budgeted already.
Correct, yeah.
Does the maintenance fee?
This is out of your existing, this is out of this year's budget.
Does the maintenance fee include support?
Yeah, yes. Okay. Yep, just like any of our tower system. We would rely heavily on that. We need to. It's a training and things like that.
Yeah, Darren, say that again. This is in the 2018 budget. We're in the middle of 2019 budget workshop, but this isn't a 2018 budget item.
It's actually in both.
Oh, okay. All right.
There you go.
Gotcha. Okay.
It was budgeted for this year,
It was
and since we didn't
budgeted
get
for
it
this year.
finished,
That's trying to-
yeah. And I did have a $60,000 because I believe that was the budget, but I believe it was actually 70 was the budget number. Just so that's an incorrect, but it's actually higher. What was budget? So.
Okay, so do we need I need a motion to send this on to council. Are there any other questions before we ask for that, or any comments?
Need a motion to send it on to, make a motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Holtmeyer, seconded by Pettit, to move this on to council. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? By your vote, you've moved it on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Before you get into the council comments section, I did ask the department heads to go ahead and be here if you had specific questions, but knowing that we had the presentation for the ISO and the fire location study, and we had the budget workshop, et cetera, I told them they don't have to come up and give individual reports, but if you have any questions for them in any of their specific departments, now you could go ahead and do so. And we will have 2 executive session items as well, so.
Anyone have any questions?
Go ahead, Joe.
In the building department, do we have a permit for Elijah McLean's addition? Do you know offhand?
You know, we could have Tom, but yes, we do have, there is a
Garage or the remodel?
The garage?
for the garage, there is a building department, or a building permit for the garage, yes.
There's multiple permits.
Correct, yeah, there's multiple permits for the project, I mean, for the overall project. There's a sewer lateral replacement permit, there's a demo permit, things as such, so yes.
Because their silting
That-
control isn't very good.
The front street, I noticed that this morning actually on my way in, so we'll be addressing that.
All right.
And keep, I mean, that's a great point, is, you know, historically, with our silt control, I mean, I've had a couple concerns, I guess, today. We have done, it's kind of more of a, for lack of better terms, a complaint-driven. We haven't done the best job, I guess, of being upfront and catching some silt control items. I will be in contact with you on this MS4 study. Hopefully, I mean, give another report like
Do
this.
you have any
next time,
kind of
not-
pamphlet that the building department could give them the process of putting up a silt fence?
Yes, we
and
do.
so forth?
We do have we specifically in the code provide a DNR handbook. I have a copy of that handbook. I could print out copies as well.
I mean, just a quick sheet, nothing else.
We do have that, and I could definitely look at, that's part of this public engagement is, you know, it's education really is what it is people just don't know that straw bales do not work.
Yeah.
You know, so you're changing a mindset, and it's going to be a program to develop, and we are working on that right now today, especially internally.
All right.
So, hopefully that answers your question.
All right. The water in the gutter on High Street. We talked about that? We already talked about that?
Talked about it.
Okay.
He'll address it.
Last month,
Here
we talked
comes
about it and
Kevin.
said it was the residents' responsibility. We gave them a notice, but we didn't proceed.
You're on it. Yes.
Yes, I mailed him a certified letter. DNR requires us to follow a policy. If we have a situation like this, we have to notify the resident, give them 30 days to fix it, and then I can turn them off. He denied the certified letter, so Thursday is his 30 days, he'll be turned off. It is the property owner's responsibility to fix that.
The reason I keep asking is because now the water has become a slime issue. Someone's going to step in it and fall, and we're going to be more liable than we are if we would have fixed it ourselves in the first place. So,
Problem with that is, we got a feeling that line is actually broke underneath of his retaining wall. So if we step in and fix it, it becomes a whole big nightmare.
right. I understand we got to take the right steps, but we've talked about this for a couple months, and it's not getting any better. The water's still rushing more. So as long as the right steps are being taken, we can report back. Thanks.
Any other questions of department heads?
The only last thing I would have is, I don't know, I don't know if the council's had a chance to go ahead and meet Tom, our new building inspector? Tom?
Here you go.
Hi, Tom.
Welcome.
Oh,
Oh, John, one more question on the airport. Have we got that resolved yet?
Yes, the airport. So the airport, if everybody recalls, we're replacing the asphalt. There's I forget the size of the asphalt, but it's a pretty significant concrete pour out there. We're having some issues with motivating the contractor to finish the project. There's approximately 15 panels that did not meet the smoothness specification. The concrete wasn't finished very, very well. And it also had some drainage, some water sitting for a little bit of time. 15 panels, we're working with our FBO, working with the actual operators at the airport. We are requiring the contractor to rip those panels out and to re-pour 15 panels. As you can imagine, that's not a positive conversation to have, so it does take some time. But they have they have agreed to do so. I would anticipate that happening over the next couple weeks.
Okay.
Liquidated damages are still in effect, essentially. There's a significant potential liquidated damages, and we're just going to have to discuss how we're going to pursue that. But they are made aware twice weekly of the number of days and the dollar amount that is at play to be charged to them.
Keep going, we have a free job.
It's, no comment.
We have met with, as John alluded to, we had a meeting with the FBO, the state, our consulting firm, as well as our legal counsel, to talk about the situation and what we have, the steps we have to go ahead and take. So,
Okay.
as John said, as you can imagine, that's not a conversation that we typically like to have, but that's what's got to be done.
Okay.
I would say the big thing here is that with these panels being removed, the goal is to make sure that we have access to the pumps at all times. I know that was a huge concern with phase one, that there was limited access to the fueling stations. From what I understand in the schedule put forth, that they will have access to it. It's just getting this thing finished up. So.
Okay.
Thanks, John. Anyone else?
I'd like to ask the Chief, just after the whole presentation, I guess what's the fire department stance at this point after, I guess, our answer to what they're saying? We're looking into, obviously, I think we heard you need more help. It's more complicated than that, I know, but.
To some degree, yes. Some of it, his report was very accurate. One of them, the data access out of Firehouse software, we have multiple things going on. So we do have some paper, and I was thinking about it. We ran a fire earlier this month, and the only way to really validate that is to QA that report, very detailed, because the personnel that show up on that report, that basically that paperwork, and really the computer record is what ISO is going to look at it in the long term, and if they want to dig deeper, they'll audit us deeper. We need to QA that. He's absolutely right. That is a flaw in our system. The data drive and that was the thing we've probably learned, and I think Bill would speak to it as well. That's the thing we learned the most out of this ISO audit. Before it was record documentation and physical paper. Now they're looking for specific analytics, and the software that we have now, it's tough to do that, and we're looking at options. We found a software platform that can help us with that. And an example of that is training. There is for an infinity bucket. You can get there's no limit in points you can get in training. Nobody reaches perfect training in ISO. There's 33,000 fire departments U.S. Nobody's getting all the training because you're doing 220 hours a year is what ISO says is the minimum. No department's getting that, career or volunteer. It's impossible. But the interesting thing, the way the new ISO says is, chiefs, you don't need training. Driver operators, you only need X amount of training. Company officers, you need 12 hours of training. Firefighters, you need 220 hours of training. So it's a matter of now, if we get a guy who goes through, in the old days, you could lump all your training together. Hazmat, driver operators, firefighter training, whatever. You could lump it up together, take the totals at the end, divide it out, and that was it. Now they're looking at a specific person by person. Are you specifically getting the hours you're supposed to get? So if you did an 80-hour hazmat class and you only need 4 hours for the year, you just helped off-shift the weight of 20 other people. Well, that's not the case anymore. So now, and what's happened now is our training points, we would dump all that in hazmat because that's what it was. It was hazmat training. Our software platform, we're looking at some new software. It automatically will say, okay, you need 4 hours in this bucket, and we'll put the other 76 hours in the other bucket that's for Infinitum. And so that's what we're doing, is trying to work on some of that data analysis. As far as manpower, we're gaining some people. We brought on 4 people in the last 2 months. So our volunteer base is good. I'm not going to say I would love to see another 30, 40 guys. I'm not going to lie to you. I'd love to have as many as I can get. But that's what we're working on slowly but surely. We're still working on recruitment. The bigger piece of it, I think, is retention. You invest a lot to get somebody and you get them kind of hooked. It's doubly important to keep them in the long term. So that's one of the things. I think retention first, then getting new people. The fire station, I think he's spot on. I think it makes sense when he's talking about the station study. We budgeted for it in a capital improvement. It just makes good sense. Yeah, I think he's got some very valid points in that. In the ISO review, we are taking information from that as well. That's part of our next 2018, 2019 year plan, is looking at what they're saying in ISO and what can we do to implement to be better at what we're doing, and better in the record keeping. That's, if you look at our ISO scores, apparatus, we're almost 100%. Pump testing, ladder testing, all the inventory on trucks, all 100%. You get down to training, it gets a little fuzzy. Pre-planning, there are a lot of points in pre-planning and inspecting buildings. and we're getting very, very few points. And he's exactly right. Mike and I and a couple others, we were doing the inspections and checking Knox boxes and trying to get at what we're doing, and we're chasing, and we're being reactive rather than proactive, and I really hate that. We're reacting to these alarm systems. You know, when we start charging people is when we start being reactive to that alarm and saying, okay, here's what you need to do to fix this to get this problem to stop, rather than being proactive on the first one and say, okay, here's what caused it, here's what you need to do to be proactive, or incentivize them to say, you need to have your alarm system serviced annually to be proactively not causing these alarms in the first place. So I think there's a lot of validity in what the report said. Some of it, you know, there's some contradictory things in there a little bit as you read it in detail, but overall the volunteers are doing a very good job. And we were talking, the chiefs were talking, it doesn't show performance. And that's one of the things, if you look at our loss record overall, some insurance companies don't use ISO. Because they're looking at loss records. What are your losses in your community compared to another zip code? And they're looking at it that way. So either way, we're good. We have a very good ISO rating for our city, but we also have a very, very good loss record.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Anyone else?
Public vote on whether or not to hold a closed meeting to discuss personnel, legal.
Or was that it? I guess that was it. Okay.
Sorry. Public vote on whether or not to hold a closed meeting to discuss personnel, legal, and real estate matters pursuant to Section 610.021 RSMO 2000. Heidrich?
Aye.
Holtzmeyer?
Aye.
Mohesky? Patchke?
Yes.
Pettit?
Yes.
Sullentrop? Waterman?
Yes.
Thank you all for being here tonight.
Have a good night.
Thanks, have a good night.